This is an emotional moment for me. I've been involved with the Oversight Board for almost 5.5 years now. We've been working on this bankruptcy for almost 4.5 years. I started following this 8 years ago when Puerto Rico first fell into financial distress. And as maybe a few of you on this Zoom know, the U.S. Congress did the wrong thing by Puerto Rico in 1984 by taking away Puerto Rico's ability to allow its public corporations or cities to file for bankruptcy, treating Puerto Rico differently than any state in the Union. With PROMESA in 2016, several decades later, Congress did the right thing. Did the right thing by passing legislation that was highly bipartisan, overwhelmingly approved. And one of the things that it gave Puerto Rico the ability to do is to make use of bankruptcy, or technically a bankruptcy-like process that is called Title III, made it available not just for Puerto Rico's public corporations, but for Puerto Rico itself, or the Commonwealth as a whole. And that's what started in May of 2017 and now has been confirmed today. The process hasn't been easy. We at various times wished that we could just wave a magic wand and make the debt go away, the crushing debt load that Puerto Rico came into the PROMESA era with. But we couldn't do that. The rule of law applies. Creditors have rights, and they have a right to be treated fairly. And PROMESA made sure that they did. The bargaining over this plan was months and months, years, very, very hard fought. And we started out with what seemed like unbridgeable differences of views and projections about what the future was going to look like. We were able to bridge those differences of opinion through some remarkable innovations in this plan of adjustment. The most prominent one, I think Natalie will talk about in a little bit, is something called a contingent value instrument that pays if Puerto Rico does better than expected in the years to come, doesn't pay if Puerto Rico doesn't do better than expected. This bankruptcy confirmation, this bankruptcy process is unprecedented. There has never been a restructuring, a public restructuring like this anywhere in America or in the world for that matter. No bankruptcy mechanism exists for countries or for states, but Puerto Rico had access to this bankruptcy mechanism, and that's what we'll be talking about today. To put this in perspective, the closest public bankruptcy in this country to this Puerto Rico restructuring is probably Detroit. Not just probably, is Detroit. The Detroit bankruptcy that started back in 2013 and was completed in 2015. Puerto Rico is much more complicated, much bigger. As complicated as Detroit was, Puerto Rico is multiples more complicated. Puerto Rico had 3 times as much debt as Detroit had. Detroit had only a fraction of the unfunded pension obligations that Puerto Rico had. This was an astonishingly complex and large and important bankruptcy. It also, in my view, is completely fair and completely sustainable for Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico will not have difficulty, in my view, satisfying its obligations under the plan. And the plan has some very important mechanisms within it to reinforce that, to make it even less likely that there'll be problems down the road. There are protections in the plan that limit significantly how much debt Puerto Rico can take on for the next 10 years. There are protections in the plan that make sure that pension payments will be funded. There is a pension trust that we'll be talking about. There are protections that make sure that Puerto Rico the legislature doesn't enact more promises that aren't paid for. Those are built into the plan as well. There's still work to be done. There's still structural reforms that need to be made. There still is fiscal responsibility that needs to be improved. But we're thrilled with the results here. We think that this restructuring, the restructuring that's been confirmed today, finally truly makes it possible to imagine a different future for Puerto Rico. Let me stop with that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to all of you. Belated Happy New Year. I think that greeting takes on a completely new dimension today, especially for all the residents in Puerto Rico. Today is truly a momentous day, as the chairman said, and it is a new day for Puerto Rico. You've heard before, and you'll hear again from many voices from today forward, how important this confirmation of the plan of adjustment is for Puerto Rico and for every single resident here. Today, the court confirmed our plan to reduce the total liabilities of the Puerto Rico government by 80% and saving Puerto Rico more than $50 billion, $50 billion in debt service payments. It reduces the government's massive debt to a level Puerto Rico can afford to repay. And almost 5 years of bankruptcy, delayed by natural disasters, a political crisis, a pandemic, is enough. This period of financial crisis is coming to an end, and the uncertainty that every Puerto Rican, every business on this island felt for so long can now be turned into stability. And that is why I don't see today so much as an end, but as a beginning. And this beginning is exactly what I envisioned when I was approached 5 years ago with the seemingly simple question of whether I would join the Oversight Board as executive director. The reason this is so emotional for us is because we've been living this for 5 years. I came to Puerto Rico understanding that Puerto Rico had overextended itself, had borrowed too much, had suffered a recession, and I knew too many Puerto Ricans felt they had no choice but to leave their island to find opportunity elsewhere. And I came to the island convinced that these problems could be solved. And why was I so certain that these solutions existed? Well, I had led a successful effort to solve a similar set of challenges under grave circumstances as Minister of Finance of Ukraine. Ukraine, too, had overextended itself. Ukraine, too, needed to reform. Ukraine, too, needed a new beginning. And I envisioned how we, the Oversight Board, together with the Puerto Rico government, could reduce expenses, first, by restructuring the debt. Second, by making government more efficient. Third, improving the competitiveness of the island's economy, enabling more investment, and as a result, increase revenues to the government budget over time, such that the funds would provide for a better Puerto Rico, provide opportunities for Puerto Ricans here in Puerto Rico. And today, we mark the culmination of the debt restructuring, having reduced the $33 billion in claims against the Commonwealth to just over $7 billion in new outstanding debt. Taken together with the 33% cut in COFINA's debt last year from $18 billion to $12 billion, we have accomplished what many thought was impossible. We have reduced the annual debt service of the government from as much as $3.9 billion in any given year to just over $1.15 billion a year. This frees up all other revenues to be used for the services most needed on the island. Of every dollar in taxes and fees collected by the Commonwealth, just 7.2 cents will go to creditors, while over 90 cents will remain to serve the people of Puerto Rico. And not only does this debt restructuring drastically reduce the debt remaining on the shoulders of the residents of Puerto Rico, but it does so while leaving almost $20 billion in the bank accounts of the government and instrumentalities. Compare that to when this crisis began and the liquidity in this government was almost non-existent. Today, not only does the government retain working levels of cash for daily operations, but also $750 million for funding needed to kickstart FEMA reconstruction and $1.3 billion for an emergency reserve fund. And we have accomplished this together with the support of the government, the mediation team under the leadership of Judge Barbara Hauser and Judge Roberta Colton, almost every creditor group with claims against the Commonwealth, including the Official Committee of Unsecured Creditors, the Retiree Committee, and government employee unions, who all came together to support this plan of adjustment and help Puerto Rico recover. But the plan Judge Swain confirmed today is more than a plan to cut debt. It also provides guardrails for future borrowings, something the chairman referred to earlier. The plan takes into account the lessons learned on how Puerto Rico reached this precarious financial situation and ensures policies are in place to never let this happen again. So Puerto Ricans never again have to fear that future governments are tempted to borrow too much. Debt is an important tool to help economies grow when it's used properly. And this new debt management policy that is part of the plan of adjustment defines that debt can only be used for investments, not to cover day-to-day expenses. The government can only refinance the existing debt to reduce borrowing costs, not to take on more liabilities. And the total debt is limited to the size of the government's income. It cannot exceed 7.94% of these taxes and fees. These are critical safeguards to ensure future fiscal stability. And you'll hear a lot about bondholders, but I want you to focus not solely on that $32 billion of claims that was resolved today with this debt restructuring. There was also $50 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. And with the confirmation of this plan of adjustment, we have successfully protected the pensions. Not only are there no cuts to any monthly pension benefits, but we have created a pension trust to be funded now to assure that monies are set aside today for tomorrow's pension payments. We have assured that teachers and judges get Social Security, which they've never had, to support their retirement income. We've restored $1.2 billion for some 50,000 Sistema 2000 employee accounts. That was their employee withholding that seems to have been used for other purposes. And we've provided $2,600 into each of the Act 106 defined contribution accounts for 35,000 employees that were in Act 1 and 447. All of this was made possible by this plan of adjustment. And now we turn with renewed energy to the second part of our vision, a more efficient and effective government which every resident of Puerto Rico wants, needs, and deserves. Building more capable and effective government requires focus on financial management, using data to make good policy decisions, and become more fiscally responsible while meeting the priorities on the island. We have an excellent tax expenditure report. What does it tell us about how we're managing our resources? What might we wish to do differently, better? We have data that can help us determine our priorities now and look at whether those priorities of the past are the same as those that we have today. We have a very successful civil service reform project at OMB and the Treasury Department. We're learning about how to ensure that our civil service is properly recruited, managed, evaluated, and paid. And finally, those structural reforms that the chairman mentioned, outlined in each of our fiscal plans. Those are the major reforms needed to make this economy more competitive, get this economy to grow. We can't focus on expenditures forever. We will continue to work alongside the government and invest in improving human capital and welfare, for example, with welfare to work reform, in the ease of doing business, for example, in reducing permitting hassles, in the delivery of more reliable, cleaner, and affordable electricity, for example, by ensuring continued reform of PREPA and bringing its bankruptcy to a successful end, and infrastructure, where the availability of over $120 billion of federal reconstruction, infrastructure, COVID-related stimulus federal funding creates a once-in-history opportunity to invest in schools, water systems, the electric grid, roads, ports, airports, and more. These last structural reforms are what will create the solid foundation for economic growth. And these reforms are an important part of the fiscal responsibility the Oversight Board was mandated to help create, and they are a key step to taking us from bankruptcy through stability and now to prosperity. Fiscal responsibility is about focusing on what's important, what services are more important than others, what investments are needed today to build our tomorrow. And if we think about fiscal responsibility in the context of making choices, a vision for priorities, the government's priorities, will emerge. A vision that can lead Puerto Rico to sustainable economic growth. Today's decision by the court provides Puerto Rico the financial space to accomplish everything needed to put Puerto Rico back on a path to prosperity and ensures that every resident will enjoy new opportunity and new hope for a brighter future. That's what I envisioned when I came to Puerto Rico, and that's what I see on the horizon today. Yes, I believe it can be done, and yes, we have just completed one of the biggest, most complicated, most difficult steps on that path.